Leveling up. If you play modern video games, you probably do it pretty much all the time. You'll level up in MOBAs, in RPGs, in shooters. If you've been playing an Ubisoft game, you level up in your game, which helps you level up that awful Uplay launcher for reasons I still do not understand. Hell, you can level up on Steam. It is, indeed, the quintessential form of progression. If you want to get better, you better level up. But why do we have to level up? Specifically, why is it still a convention for MMORPGs that leveling is a thing that we constantly do? Start a character, level up to max level, new expansion, here's 10 more levels. Want to start a new character and alt? Grind all those levels all over again. Some MMOs have caught on. I mean, World of Warcraft lets you buy a token, which pumps you up to max level. EverQuest 2 just lets you roll characters close to endgame. But for the vast majority of these games, you want to start an alt or a new character for whatever reason, or just start on a new game, you better get back on that treadmill, sister, because you've got a lot of levels to get through before you can start doing the things that really make the game awesome. Now, throughout this video, when I talk about leveling, I'm going to use WildStar as my core example, A, because I play WildStar a lot, and B, because I think WildStar has one of the most egregious leveling problems out of any MMORPG on the market. I know I don't usually say bad things about WildStar, but this one has to be said. WildStar, ever since everybody kind of got to max level, your leveling is probably the worst. But there are solutions, and I will get into those at the end of the video. But for now, let's talk about why leveling up is still a thing, and why so many people either love it or hate it. So what kind of game would we have if we took leveling out of an MMORPG? Skyforge. You would have Skyforge. In all honesty, that doesn't really count. Skyforge is basically leveling under a different name. You kind of go through the same motions before you can have fun. Leveling has been a staple of MMOs since the beginning. You travel out, you kill monsters, you complete quests, you gain experience, and you level up. Leveling up acted as a really good way to introduce someone to the world, guide them through the stories, get them acquainted with their character, and yeah, it feels friggin' great to level up. Ah, yes! Level up! That feeling comes from a Skinner box system, and a lot smarter people than me have talked about how Skinner boxes work before. But basically, you're conditioned to play more because when you level up, it's awesome. You get new spells, bunch of flashy lights and cool sounds, everybody in guild chat says grats. Leveling seems pretty awesome. Count me in. So why do I seem to not like this idea? And don't get me wrong, in a lot of games, leveling has its place. But there has been this trend of MMORPGs where the endgame is so drastically different from what you encounter in the world, say for like daily quests, but fuck daily quests. Suddenly the questing experience you've been doing for so long gets replaced by dungeons, world bosses, raids, and that's just to use kind of WildStar as an example. There is a stark difference between what you do while you level in WildStar and what you do when you hit endgame at WildStar. There really is. You might be going through the same motions, but it's for different objectives entirely, and the context is entirely different. You're doing dungeons because you need to gear up, you're doing raids because you want to gear up, and you're maybe doing daily quests, but really there's a hard limit on how much that matters. In a lot of MMORPGs, especially since World of Warcraft, there's this massive difference between the leveling experience and the endgame experience. And it's really a bizarre dichotomy as to why that is. Why do we spend probably hundreds of hours reaching max level in order to do something that we completely do differently? Like, raiding is not the same as leveling. Even if you're doing dungeons, leveling dungeons are nothing like endgame dungeons or endgame raids. Just look at World of Warcraft. The first, 10 dungeons in the game, up until you hit about Wrath of the Lich King, in fact, probably up until you hit the current expansion, are a joke. You have tanks doing 75% of the group's damage. You don't even need healers. Your healers are usually DPSing. Unless you're coming up against something really strong or your tank is a total idiot, you can basically face roll through everything in the game. So why even bother? In their defense, as I said, World of Warcraft has come up with a level 70 or level 100 token at this point, where you can just pop up to max level, but you have to buy that. That's expensive. What if I don't want to spend $60 to get an instant max level character? Well, then I have to level a brand new character. And even with heirlooms, that sucks a lot of dick. So why is leveling such a thing? Well, there's a couple of reasons why you level. The first one is it's a pretty solid progression path. Levels are easy to see. You get enough experience points, and then there's the big flashy colors, and you learn new spells, and you're a level higher. The next one is that leveling is a really good way to introduce you to the game's story and guide you through it. And the third would be it's a good way to get you acquainted with the game and itself. I would like to debunk all of these. So let's talk about the level up, though. But first I have to ask you a question. How many of you have reached max level in any MMORPG? I'm going to use WildStar mostly for this example, but really any MMORPG counts. I'm assuming that there are games that you have played where you have not reached max level. I reached the original max level in the Old Republic, and I can't do it again to save my life. There are other games that I've tried, such as Guild Wars 2, where I can't seem to make it to max level. And why is this? Why can I seem to not do it? Because I'm not interested in leveling. So I started playing these games for one reason or another. So in the case of Guild Wars 2, I started playing the game because I really like the idea of the world story adapting and changing as you go. And when it comes to something like the Old Republic, I really like the idea of raiding at endgame. Originally they had raids, and the lore, the mystics once told us that the Old Republic had raids, but also the story as well. I was able to make it to the max level at the Old Republic once, because I was very interested in the agent storyline for the Imperials. Otherwise, I've never been able to do it again for any of those other games because leveling is not the thing I want to do. I don't want to do quests. I don't want to run leveling dungeons and slowly increase my bar. I want to do the thing I came to play this game to do. Imagine if you're playing God of War and you want to rip that Minotaur's eye out, but before you can rip that Minotaur's eye out, you have to spend 42 hours punching goblins. You lose it. You probably aren't stoked about this. You're just punching goblins for hours so you can rip out that Minotaur's eye. You came to the game because you want super ultra violence. You don't want to just punch goblins for 40 hours. But then after you punch goblins for 40 hours, you're powerful enough to rip that fucking Minotaur's eye out. It's really cool and you're stoked. I think it's actually a cycle. You know what? It's God of War. I haven't played it in years. But the point is, when you come to these MMORPGs, I guarantee a lot of people don't come to a game like this because they want to level. I'm sure most people want to come to an MMORPG because they want to do something aside from leveling. Then why is leveling a thing? Leveling just becomes a chore at this point. It's pointless. It's a bunch of busy work you have to complete in order to reach the thing that you really want to do. In WildStar's case, a lot of people come into the game hoping to enjoy the PvE because the PvE is goddamn amazing in WildStar. But they wind up getting saddled behind 10 or 15 hours of leveling before they can really start to enjoy the great PvE that the game has. Even getting to level 10 and doing Proto Games Academy is just kind of a small taste of what is to come. The raiding and the dungeons in WildStar are fantastic, but the leveling experience is boring. The questing is not that interesting. There's a lot of cool story out there, don't get me wrong, but you can only really experience story once. And you can only experience so much of it when you're collecting bear asses. Let's talk about the second reason people usually level, and companies make us level, that is to communicate the story to the player. So, WildStar does this through lore items throughout zones. You've got quests, of course, that are doing their own stories with cutscenes and things like that, but there are also things like data cubes and notebooks and all of that cool stuff around that provides you with the story of the zone and the world story as a whole. So, why do we have to do these quests and go through these zones in order to get this story? There are much more interesting ways to deliver story to a player. For example, I actually really like the Drusera instances, all of them. They're a really cool way to deliver story to the player. That said, they're not really super duper lucrative for experience points, because you're going into this dungeon and you're doing like one quest that takes you like half an hour, and then coming out when in the same amount of time you could have done 10 quests in Whitevale. It's not super efficient for leveling, but it is super interesting to do because it provides you with some interesting background and the story. They are, in essence, the most interesting story points handed to you in the game in that sort of way, where they're given to you through quests. That's a much better way to tell your story. if you're going to tell your story, why not do it like that? Why do it through meaningless questing throughout zones? Or more importantly, why do it through leveling at all? Why not make the story its own rewards? There are a lot of people, including myself, who find the story to be its own reward. The only reason I did Omnicore 1 was because I wanted to know what the story was. The only reason I did the Defile stuff was because I wanted to know what the story was. I wasn't interested in collecting bear asses. I wanted to find out what kind of cool stuff was going on with our favorite blue stalker chick. That's why I did that. I didn't do it to level. But leveling seems to be intrinsically tied to story. When Blizzard wants to tell you the story about Thrall's dad or whatever the fuck they did in Warlords of Draenor, they do it through 10 additional levels. And you make your way through this, and you get your levels, and you get your story kind of spoon-fed, and then you reach max level, and you do what you wanted to do anyways, which was Raid, which also does a great job of telling the story, by the way. Raids and dungeons are fantastic for telling a story, but don't mind me. There's a lot of great ways to communicate a story. They don't have to be done through meaningless questing that feels more like a chore to level up than it does like something interesting you want to engage yourself in. I mean, how many people read quest text? Do you read quest text? I don't read quest text more than the first time I go through. Most people don't read quest text. They skip through it. A lot of people I know who've leveled in WildStar skip through most of the quest text. That's why those lore videos are so popular. People just love to hear it because they didn't hear it in game, because they didn't care, because they had to level. They had to get to max level so they could do the thing they wanted to do, which was raid or dungeons or PvP. Like, I don't understand this disconnect between what we want to do and coming into the game brand new and being forced to walk up this treadmill. But more on that in a second. Finally, the third part of leveling, the third reason you go through all those levels and play all the way up to level 100 or 50 or 60 or 80, whatever your game gives you. Learning to play the game proper. You gotta learn your character. You gotta learn your rotations. You gotta learn your spells. You gotta learn how your character works as a whole. This is something I used to buy into. I used to believe that you have to play your character all the way to max level in order to learn what to do. My opinion changed quite rapidly when I met a lot of endgame hunters who still had no goddamn idea what they were doing. Left Growlon and their pets, and they're just sitting there aimed shotting what are you doing? What are you doing? But is leveling really learning how to play your character, especially when the endgame in a lot of these games is so drastically different than the leveling game? No, it really isn't. In fact, World of Warcraft showed us that you can get all that 50 hours of leveling in about 10 minutes with their level 85 boost thing. I can't remember what level you could boost to. I think it's 80 or 90. What the hell is the max level in World of Warcraft right now? Has it been that long since I played World of Warcraft? God, it was... Holy shit, it's been a year. The point is, if leveling were this tutorial on how to play your character, you wouldn't need to look up a guide when you hit max level because you realize your DPS sucks. You would have been taught how to do all this. You would have been taught how to itemize and how to deal with boss mechanics and things like that. But this isn't what leveling does. Leveling puts you through your quests and you do your thing. So what is leveling? Well, leveling is a time sink, and a lot of MMOs have had time sinks since like the beginning of time. MMORPGs are famous for time sinks. Reaching max level in Vanilla WoW took like 3 months. It was crazy. But at the same time, they needed those because you wanted people playing for a long time. You wanted people constantly engaged with your game because you needed those people to keep shelling out $15 a month so you keep the servers from catching fire. But that's not how the world works now. There's a couple of sub-games left, but not really. Most games have switched over to a free-to-play or a buy-to-play model, which is drastically different in how you have to engage your player base. Because now you don't necessarily need them to be playing constantly, you just need them to always want to come back. Although certain games kind of don't do this super well, other games do it really well. Guild Wars being a really good example of a game that just makes you want to come back every once in a while. And so long as you're coming back, you're still spending money on the game, which means the game is still making money, which is a good thing. So what do? Why is leveling still a thing? It's a time sink. It gets you invested in the game and it keeps you paying your sub. So are we okay to move on to an MMORPG landscape that doesn't involve pointless leveling? Or if it does have to involve leveling, can we make that leveling a lot more interesting? And can we make it relevant to the rest of the game? Can we get people into the things they want to do faster? Or right away? Absolutely. Let me describe to you my dream MMORPG. Let's imagine an MMORPG with no levels. No, you're thinking of Skyforge. Stop thinking about Skyforge. No, now you're thinking of EVE Online. But seriously though, these two might be a good place to start. So let's imagine your regular MMORPG fare. So there's a continent, and it's got a bunch of zones, and there's like a big capital city where people like run around and ask for gold or like talk about things in trade chat that aren't trade or whatever people do in the capital. Now let's say that this city is like it for civilization. Everything else got like fucked up by some horrible event. Now you're thinking Destiny. I know you're thinking Destiny, but let's like move away from Destiny because Destiny sucks. So there's no quests, at least none prevalent to the game's story. Everything is kind of outside of the walls of this city. The further you go away from the city, the more dangerous things tend to become. So how do you progress in our imaginary little MMORPG? Well, the same way you would progress through any MMORPG at endgame. Gear, equipment, and so on. Maybe special stats that unlock spells, or something like that. Gear is the normal way you progress once you've reached endgame in most MMORPGs. It's a slow and smooth and iterative process which improves your character over time. In a truly Guild Wars-y or Final Fantasy XIV-y way, your weapon might just determine your skills or something along those lines. Or maybe you pick a class, it doesn't matter. But how do you gear up? And what do you gear towards? Well, you gear up any way you want, and you gear up to do whatever you want. So, from the get-go, you'd have access to raids, dungeons, PvP, exploration, and crafting. After a short tutorial for each, maybe about 10 minutes, you can dive in and pretty much do whatever you want. Of course, certain things are linked, like dungeons and raids, as well as exploring and fighting monsters, which kind of drop gear with similar statistics, but on a different strata. Crafting might yield its own rewards, like gearing through crafting might allow for more precise and refined tools, like to better craft better equipment, with special materials out in the world in dungeons and things like that. You can fight other players, you can progress through PvP, you can explore the zones and plumb like ancient tombs and find ancient artifacts that work as your gear, or like pieces of storyline out there, out in the world with exploring. The further into the dark you go, the more powerful you've got to be, so you gear in any form you need to. Whether you're going to raids, or you're going to dungeons, or you're crafting, all of this advances your character towards the same ends. You're advancing your character in these ways. This could be done through leveling, arguably, but this isn't a natural MMORPG leveling system. It's a natural MMORPG leveling system or progression system is fairly arbitrary. It doesn't let you go out and do whatever you want because it needs to put you on a path so that it can build content around you. But that's not how an MMO should be. Leveling is linear. MMOs shouldn't be linear. They're the most powerful non-linear gaming source that we really have. Raids, dungeons, exploration, and crafting. Many routes to the same goal, advancement on your terms. Not in the arbitrary terms of a leveling system that is detached from the rest of the game and what you want to do. Your advancement comes clean through what you want. Not after dozens of hours of slogging through content completely unrelated to the enjoyable parts of the game. But Matt, you basically just sound like you stripped out the leveling components of a game like WildStar. Yeah, it's the point. That's how superfluous leveling is. Why do we bother when it's so painfully unrelated to the things in an MMO that we want to do? Why do we need to level up when there are so many better forms of progression that are in the game already, but you have to level up to get to them? Why level up characters when the potential exists to level up our games? Wow, that was a long one. Sorry about that, I got a little bit passionate about that one. But thank you very much for watching this video rant thing on leveling up and why I think it's becoming increasingly irrelevant in its current form. If you have anything to say, feel free to shoot a comment at me. I love reading your comments and I respond to them whenever I can. And if you want to support the channel, please like and subscribe or share this video with your friends. It means a huge amount to me for that to be able to happen. Speaking of crazy support for this channel, we just hit 5,000 subscribers. What? What? Thank you guys. You guys are freaking amazing. You made my day. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. And you all have a great one.